Sometimes in life, the people we ignore the most are the ones sent to save us. Imagine standing on the edge of a decision so important it could change your life forever, and the only person who warns you is someone you never thought to listen to. That's what happened to Chief Silas Adeyemo, a billionaire who almost lost everything because of blind trust, and who was ultimately saved by the quietest voice in his housemaid. But before we dive into betrayal, scandal, and survival, let me ask you this. Have you ever had a gut feeling or a dream so intense that it felt like a warning? Most of us ignore those feelings, brushing them off as nonsense. But what if one day your survival depended on listening to that whisper of intuition? Chief Silas was the kind of man people envied, but didn't truly know. He had wealth that most could only dream of, a reputation that commanded respect in every real estate circle, and a mansion that looked like it had been plucked straight from an architectural magazine. But beneath all the marble floors and imported furniture, something far more fragile was hiding: trust. Silas built his empire with his best friend Toby Onasila. They were like yin and yang: Toby, the fast-talking, risk-taking showman, and Silas, the quiet strategist with a calm that could make mountains shift. But the trouble with partnerships is that you often assume loyalty until it's too late to question it. Now picture this: Silas is on his way out for one of the most important meetings of his career. His investors are waiting, contracts worth billions are on the line, and time is ticking. He's adjusting his wristwatch, keys in hand, already running late, when he's interrupted in the most unexpected way. His maid Dupe falls to her knees, blocking his path, tears welling up in her eyes. Her voice shakes as she begs him not to leave the house. She had a dream, she says, a vivid one. He left the house in that exact outfit, entered that exact car, and never came back. Now this is where many of us would scoff. A maid having dreams, telling a billionaire what to do? Silas was no different. He was confused, stunned even. But what's interesting is what happened next. He didn't dismiss her immediately. Something about her tone, her fear, the way her hands trembled, it stirred something inside him. That's a critical human moment we often overlook. Intuition doesn't always come with logic. Sometimes it comes dressed in the most unlikely messenger. And then his wife came downstairs, Mariah. Beautiful, poised, and visibly annoyed. She didn't ask why Dupe was crying or why her husband had stopped in his tracks. She went straight into defense mode, brushing it off as nonsense. But here's where it gets fascinating. As Mariah berated the maid, Silas's inner voice, the one we all have but often ignore, started to speak. That gut feeling intensified. The air around him changed, and in a moment of rare vulnerability, he listened. He put down his keys, turned away from the door, and said he wasn't going anywhere. Now pause and think about that. How many of us would risk disappointing powerful investors based on a dream told to us by someone we barely speak to? This wasn't about logic. It was about something deeper, an inner alarm finally breaking through the noise of success, pressure, and ego. Silas didn't know it then, but that single decision saved his life. Let's connect this to the real world for a moment. In 2018, there was a tragic story of a young businessman in the UK who ignored repeated warnings from his assistant about taking a certain flight due to bad weather. She had a bad feeling, even called in sick to avoid joining him. The flight later crashed. Survivors, zero. Gut instincts, dreams, intuitive nudges, they're often dismissed because they don't come from qualified sources. But as we'll see in this story, the source doesn't matter when the message is true. Back to Silas. As he sat down in his living room, the maid still trembling nearby, he felt something new: uncertainty. Not about her words, but about the people around him. His wife was furious. Not shocked, not worried, furious. That was the first red flag. Her reaction wasn't love, it was inconvenience. Then came the phone call. His business partner Toby demanding to know why he missed the meeting. Angry, rushed, unconcerned. Another red flag. No, are you okay? Just what happened to the deal? And then the second phone call came, and this one changed everything. His driver had been in a horrific accident in the exact car Silas normally used, on the exact road he would have taken at the exact time he would have been there. The driver was unconscious. The car destroyed. Blood. Chaos. Screams. The dream Dupe described wasn't just a bad omen, it had nearly come true. Silas's heart sank. The house fell into a deafening silence. But Mariah's response indifference, cold detachment. She didn't even blink. And that's when Silas truly began to see her for who she was or who she wasn't. This wasn't about whether she was loving. It was about whether she was human. The silence after a near-death experience is louder than any explosion. As Silas sat in his lavish living room, untouched and pristine, his mind was anything but calm. The image of that wrecked car haunted him not because of what happened, but because of what almost did. That was supposed to be him in that ambulance. That was supposed to be his blood, his life. And as that reality sank in, something else started rising: doubt. Doubt in his marriage, doubt in his friendship, doubt in the empire he thought he controlled. But most importantly, a deeper question took root. Why did the maid care more about his life than the people he loved? Silas didn't voice these questions out loud. He didn't confront Mariah. He didn't call Toby back right away. No, he did something far more powerful. He watched. He observed. And what he saw in the days that followed confirmed what he feared: the real danger hadn't been outside those gates, it had been living inside his home all along. Mariah's behavior began to shift. Not in dramatic ways, she didn't scream or cause scenes. But she became more dismissive, more irritated. She avoided Dupe like she carried a disease. And every time the accident was mentioned, she changed the subject. That wasn't grief. That was guilt. And Silas noticed. Now here's something worth thinking about. When someone almost dies and you're truly connected to them, even if the love is gone, some part of you flinches. Your humanity reacts. You ask, what if I lost them? But Mariah, she asked, so you're just sitting here all day? That single sentence told Silas everything he needed to know. His wife wasn't just detached, she was calculating. And Dupe. She didn't say much after that day. She went back to cleaning quietly, folding clothes, serving meals like nothing happened. But Silas's eyes followed her differently now, not with suspicion, but with respect. He began to realize that the woman he once considered invisible had more loyalty in her silence than others had in their grand speeches. One morning, as he sat in the dining room pretending to read from his tablet, Dupe walked in to clear the plates. She bent slightly to pick up a napkin, and in a barely audible whisper said something that sent chills down his spine. "Sir, please don't sign any documents this week." He looked up slowly, surprised. "Why?" he asked, voice cautious. Dupe, still facing downward, replied, "I had another dream. This one was even clearer. You signed something, and not long after everything fell apart. You lost your company. Your accounts were frozen. There were police officers. You were in handcuffs." Then she stood up straight, picked up the tray, and left the room like nothing had happened. Think about this. You're a billionaire. Your maid walks in and tells you not to sign papers, or you could lose your freedom. It sounds absurd. But then again, so did her first warning, and it literally saved your life. Silas was no longer the man who ignored gut feelings. He didn't brush it off. He didn't laugh. He simply remembered and waited. A few days later, Toby visited the mansion. Loud as ever, all charm and bravado. He hugged Silas like nothing had happened, made jokes, talked about how lucky he was to have avoided death, and of course brought new documents for a Dubai real estate project. "It's still alive," Toby grinned. "Just needs your signature." Silas smiled politely. "Send them," he said. But something was already off. The documents arrived that night. Silas opened them in his study, and immediately something felt wrong. The numbers didn't add up. The listed payout accounts didn't look familiar. The foreign bank information had a name that rang no bells. Now this is a moment many successful people never reach, trusting their instinct over their network. Silas could have brushed it off, could have assumed Toby made a clerical error, but he didn't. He remembered Dupe's words, so he locked the documents away and made a quiet phone call to a trusted financial contact. What they uncovered made his blood run cold. For 2 years, Toby had been siphoning money from the company through fake project accounts, hiding funds offshore, laundering them under shell companies with falsified ownership. It wasn't just shady, it was criminal. It wasn't just betrayal, it was sabotage. And Silas realized something else: this didn't happen overnight. This was premeditated. It meant his friend, his so-called brother, had been planning this for years. Right under his nose. Let's pause here. In real-life cases, this isn't uncommon. The Enron scandal in the early 2000s involved top executives hiding massive losses through off-the-books partnerships, partners who were supposed to be trustworthy friends. Even closer to the individual level, small business owners have lost everything because their co-founders or accountants bled them dry in silence. Betrayal often wears the mask of brotherhood. Meanwhile, back at home, Mariah's frustration with Dupe was boiling over. "She's too comfortable," she said one morning, slamming drawers. "She's too quiet. I don't trust her." Silas, sipping his coffee, calmly replied, "She's efficient." But Mariah wasn't just annoyed. She was threatened. Because the more Silas grew distant from her, the more he listened to Dupe. And the more he listened, the less control Mariah had over him. Eventually, Mariah confronted him. "You're choosing a maid over me," she snapped. Silas looked at her and said the words that had been forming in his soul for weeks. "I'm choosing my peace." That moment shattered the illusion. Mariah stormed out and, like a true conspirator, called the only other person who shared her agenda, Toby. Their phone call revealed everything. Mariah was never in love. Toby had told her to marry Silas as part of a long con to gain access to the company and wealth. They had been planning for years. The accident that Dupe warned about, that wasn't fate. It was arranged. Armed men were sent to intercept Silas on his way to the meeting. Dupe's warning had unknowingly saved him from a premeditated hit. And now Mariah was breaking down because their plan was falling apart because of a housemaid. That's the irony of evil plans. They crumble not from grand attacks, but from tiny interventions. A whispered warning, a change in route, a decision to pause. That's what destroyed their empire before it ever took hold. By this point, Silas was no longer confused, he was awakening. The blindfold was off and everything around him began to look different. The home he once saw as a sanctuary now felt like a stage. The wife he once adored, a polished stranger. The best friend he trusted with his fortune, a thief in designer shoes. And the maid Dupe, the one person with no title, no wealth, no agenda, was the only one who actually tried to save him. Silas's instincts weren't just sharper now. They were surgical. He didn't confront Toby or Mariah just yet. He didn't make noise. He watched. He waited. And when Mariah casually announced that she'd be visiting her sick father in Abeokuta, Silas didn't argue. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded. "All right," he said. But his eyes, they were already somewhere else. He had seen this move before: vague trips, sudden departures, unexplained tension. Something was off. Again. And this time he didn't take chances. The moment she stepped out of the house smiling and waving like a loving wife, Silas made a phone call to someone whose loyalty wasn't for sale. "Follow her," he said. "Don't interfere. Just give me updates." That was all. He didn't yell. He didn't break down. Because when you've been betrayed, enough silence becomes your greatest weapon. What followed was confirmation, not revelation. Mariah didn't go to Abeokuta. She went straight to a boutique hotel in Victoria Island. She checked in under a false name. Less than an hour later, Toby arrived wearing sunglasses and a smug expression. They didn't even try to hide it. They went to the same room, spent the entire day inside, like two characters who thought the story had already ended in their favor. Now let's pause for real-life reflection. In countless high-profile divorce cases and corporate implosions, affairs between business partners and spouses are tragically common. The 2006 Hewlett-Packard scandal revealed surveillance, deception, and betrayals among board members. And in everyday life, according to a study published by the American Psychological Association, around 40% of people admit to infidelity during long-term relationships. But the most damaging betrayals are never just romantic, they're strategic, calculated, financial, and emotional. When Silas walked into that hotel later that evening, there were no cameras, no lawyers, no theatrics. Just him, calm, purposeful. He didn't storm in like a man fueled by rage. He walked like a man who had already made peace with the truth. The receptionist barely resisted after seeing the bundles of cash. "Room 406, she whispered. And just like that, the door opened. Mariah was in a bathrobe sipping wine by the minibar. Toby was shirtless scrolling through his phone. They both looked up, and time stood still. In that moment, the air in the room wasn't just heavy, it was poisonous. Mariah's wine glass slipped. Toby stood up too quickly. But Silas didn't yell. He didn't demand explanations. He simply raised one hand. Don't, he said. Just that. One word that carried the weight of betrayal, heartbreak, and closure all at once. Mariah tried to speak. I can explain. But Silas shook his head. Don't lie. Not here. Then he added words that pierced deeper than any insult. I stopped trusting you 2 months ago. Now I know why. What followed was silence thicker than any scream could have been. Toby, ever the talker, attempted to rationalize. It's not what you think. Silas's reply was surgical. It's exactly what I think. And worse. And just like that, he turned, opened the door, and left. No shouting, no drama. Because sometimes the most powerful response is to walk away, knowing the game is over and you didn't lose. You just woke up in time. That night, Silas returned home, went straight to his study, and made 2 calls, one to his lawyer, the other to his accountant. Prepare the divorce papers, he said, and begin the buyout process for Toby's shares. Immediately. Let's talk about the weight of that moment. Most people, when betrayed by both a spouse and best friend, fall into emotional spirals. They implode. But Silas chose power over pity, action over anger. He was done being the silent victim in someone else's plot. And that decision to face betrayal with clarity rather than chaos is something we can all learn from. Of course, the pain didn't disappear. For 2 days, Silas didn't eat. He didn't cry. But the silence in the mansion was unbearable. It wasn't just the quiet of luxury, it was the vacuum left by broken trust. Every painting on the wall mocked him. Every polished surface reflected back a man who gave everything to the wrong people. And the woman who stayed through it all, still sweeping, still serving food he couldn't bring himself to touch, still folding sheets he barely slept in. Dupe didn't ask questions. She didn't gloat. She just did her job because her purpose was never about being seen. It was about saving someone who had stopped seeing clearly. Then came the day the divorce papers arrived, signed and sealed. Mariah didn't show up. She didn't send an apology, just her lawyer. Tell him I agree to everything she had said. I just want peace. Peace. After plotting with another man to destroy her husband, after attempting to kill him for money, after pretending to love him while sleeping beside his betrayer. She wanted peace. And Silas, he gave it to her. He signed the papers with steady hands. Not because he was over it, but because he was done carrying it. Because sometimes letting go is the only way to stop the bleeding. After betrayal, what's left? For Chief Silas Adeyemo, the answer was nothing and everything. His mansion was still intact. The cars still gleamed in the driveway. The bank accounts were untouched, at least for now. But what had been shattered couldn't be measured in property or currency. It was trust. It was love. It was the belief that the people closest to you are exactly who they claim to be. And when that illusion breaks, the echo is deafening. Silas spent the following nights alone in the dark. The chandelier remained on, not because he needed light, but because silence in a dark room felt too much like a grave. He didn't sleep. He didn't speak. He simply sat. The photos on the walls, once proud displays of a perfect marriage, now seemed like cruel jokes. And the worst part, there were no answers, just questions. How long had Mariah been lying to him? How long had Toby been stealing from him? How did he, so calculated, so observant, miss it all? But there was one person who never shifted. One presence that remained steady amid the storm. Dupe, the maid who had no power, no title, no status, yet somehow held the most truth in the entire house. And then just when Silas began to breathe again, she spoke. It was late evening. The house was still. Silas sat on the living room couch, unmoving, when Dupe entered. This time she didn't come to serve water or clear plates. She came with purpose. I'm leaving tomorrow, she said. Her voice was soft, but every word was as sharp as glass. Silas turned to her, throat tight. Why, he asked, and what she said next would change the course of his life. My assignment here is over, she replied. Now pause for a second. Not my job, not my contract. She called it an assignment, as if she hadn't just worked in the house but been sent to it. There was something about her tone, humble, resolute, spiritual. Silas didn't understand it yet, but he felt it. You don't have to go, he whispered, and for the first time since everything collapsed, his voice cracked. You're the only person who hasn't hurt me. Dupe nodded gently. I know, but I wasn't sent to stay. I was sent to save. This moment, this unexpected declaration was bigger than any boardroom deal, bigger than any court case or divorce paper, because it reminded Silas that sometimes salvation comes in ordinary clothes, that the people who pull us from our worst chapters aren't always our friends' spouses or colleagues. Sometimes they're strangers sent at just the right time, angels with calloused hands and quiet voices. Then Dupe said something that finally stitched everything together. If you had signed that document, she said, you would have lost everything: your company, your name, your freedom. You would have gone to prison, and the people who plotted your death would have smiled over breakfast. Silas stood still, rooted like a man who had just stepped out of a burning building. He had almost walked into the fire. He had almost handed the match to his own enemy, but he didn't, because of her. She smiled, but not the kind of smile that says goodbye. It was the kind of smile that says, you'll be fine now. She took a breath, then added, live right. Trust slowly, love carefully, watch everyone. And then just like that, she was gone. Now let's reflect on something powerful here. In many spiritual traditions, from Christianity to Islam to Buddhism, there are stories of mysterious guides or visitors who appear in people's lives during times of crisis. In the Bible, Hebrews 13:2 says, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Was Dupe an angel, a prophet, a woman gifted with divine intuition? The script never fully confirms it, but the impact of her presence was undeniable. Silas stood in that doorway for a long time after she left. He didn't chase her. He didn't try to stop her. But something within him was breaking and healing at the same time. It's a rare emotional state when grief and growth coexist, and in that fragile space he made a decision. He picked up the wedding photo of him and Mariah, the one they had framed with gold trim. He stared at it for 5 seconds. Then he shattered it against the marble floor. The glass exploded. The lie was finally broken. He bent down, picked up a shard, and saw his own reflection in it, cut, bruised, but awake. And for the first time in years, he smiled. Not because things were perfect, but because the storm had passed, and he had survived. Let's connect this moment to something personal. Many of us have had to walk away from people we loved, realizing they loved the version of us that served their needs, not our true selves. We've ignored warnings, red flags, and gut feelings because we crave stability or loyalty. But real peace never comes from pretending. It comes from choosing truth, no matter how painful it is to uncover. Silas began to rebuild, not just his company, but his character. He poured himself into Crestrock real estate, not as a man chasing profit, but as a man rebuilding purpose. He cleaned out the rot Toby had left behind, fired the enablers, hired young ethical minds. He opened a new branch in Abuja, refused shady deals, walked away from bribes, became the kind of CEO who no longer measured success by status but by integrity. And something beautiful happened. The scars began to fade, slowly but surely. He started walking in parks again, reading books he had shelved for years, eating meals not out of obligation but with genuine appetite. And then one evening, under the stars, love returned, but not like before. It came softly through a woman he met at a charity auction. She didn't care about his last name. She cared about children, books, community. They talked for hours, not about wealth, but about values. Silas didn't rush it. He didn't try to impress. And when he finally held her hand, it wasn't to complete a picture, it was to start a new one. And somewhere across town, in a cracked pillared duplex where suspicion and tension choked the air, a tired woman answered her door to find Dupe standing there once again. A new house, a new family, a new mission. The woman at the door, tearful and broken, asked, "Are you the lawyer?" Dupe smiled just as gently as before and said, "No, I'm the housemaid," because wherever she arrived, lies crumbled and truth found a voice. 1 year. That's how long it took for Chief Silas Adiemo to reclaim his life, not just in the public eye, but deep within his soul. In that time, he didn't just survive, he transformed. Because true healing doesn't come from forgetting pain. It comes from remembering what it taught you. The man who once measured success by the size of his contracts now measured it by the clarity of his conscience. The mansion still stood, yes. The cars still gleamed. But there was no more pretending. No more polished photos masking private turmoil. No more parties hosted with people who smiled only until the lights turned off. Silas had stripped away the illusion, and what remained was something far more powerful than wealth. It was wisdom. Dupe's absence was felt, but not in an empty way. Her departure was like a lighthouse turning off after safely guiding a ship to shore. Silas didn't chase her. He didn't try to replace her, because deep down he understood she hadn't been a regular maid. She had been a divine disruption, sent not just to clean his home, but to expose every unclean corner of his life. And now with every sunrise, Silas made different choices. He prayed more, laughed louder, loved slower, trusted less, but trusted better. And when he looked at the mirror, he didn't see a man broken by betrayal. He saw a man reborn from it. Let's zoom out and reflect for a moment. How many of us are surrounded by Mariah and Toby types in our own lives? People who clap when we win, but plan against us when we sleep. How many of us ignore the dupes around us, the soft voices, the quiet truths, the inconvenient warnings, because we're too busy chasing success or trying to look perfect? It's easy to miss the mess when the house looks clean. But as this story proves, not every luxury home is filled with peace, and not every poor servant is powerless. Dupe never raised her voice. She never demanded loyalty or thanks. She never stood in front of a camera screaming her value. Yet in a world filled with noise and betrayal, her silence saved a man's life, business, and soul. That is power. That is purpose. That is what real character looks like. And here's where it gets even more profound. Silas isn't just a character in a cautionary tale. He's a mirror, a reflection of what happens when we stop listening to the wrong voices and finally start hearing the right ones, even when they come from places we least expect. Whether you're a CEO, a student, a mother, or a mechanic, betrayal and redemption look the same on all of us. Raw, real, transformational, and Dupe. She remains a mystery. Was she sent by God? Was she simply a woman with a gift? Or was she part of a divine pattern that places protectors in our lives, disguised as nobodies we may never know? But what we do know is this: she showed up when she was needed. She stayed as long as she was called, and she left once the mission was done. Somewhere in another town, she enters another broken home. The faces are different, but the lies are familiar, and so is her strength. In the final analysis, this isn't just a story about a billionaire and a maid. It's about the courage to listen, the wisdom to pause, and the power of unseen people to change everything. So here's your takeaway, dear viewer. Don't ignore the whispers while chasing applause. Don't dismiss the humble because they don't wear prestige. And never forget, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding your future in their hands. And if you've been betrayed before, if you've lost money, trust, or love, remember, this survival isn't just about what you walk away from. It's about what you walk into next. Like Silas, you too can rebuild. You too can restart. You too can rise again. Not in revenge, but in wisdom. Because when the storm passes, and it always does, the ones who survive are not the strongest or the richest. They're the ones who finally learn to see. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched you, inspired you, or reminded you of someone in your own life, share it. And remember, the next time someone seemingly small warns you about something big, pause, listen. They might just be your dupe.